Hi, Taylor T. Carlson here, and we're doing some more movies on 4K today. About a year and a half ago, I did a review and an unboxing for Volume 1 of the Alfred Hitchcock Classics Collection in 4K. And now we have Volume 2 of that collection at long last. This time around featuring 5 of Hitch's classic films. It is kind of a complicated story with the legalities of a lot of his movies, so Universal doesn't own the rights to all of them. Some have been released by Criterion, some have been released by other studios. So it remains to be seen what's going to happen with some of those other movies that don't fall under the Universal umbrella. These collections, I'm assuming there'll be 3 in total, have been reissues of the movies that were on Blu-ray, but split into smaller collections because we're also getting 4K discs. The first collection had Psycho, The Birds, Rear Window, and Vertigo. Volume 2 gives us Saboteur, Shadow of a Doubt, The Trouble with Harry, Marnie, and Family Plot. So you actually get one more film in here than he did in the first film, though admittedly, those films were the unabashed classics. About half the movies in this collection are really good, and the other half are maybe not really in Hitch's upper tier, though there's certainly no bad film here. So we'll unbox this, I'll go through, show off what's in here, and share my opinion. Top of the box, side of the box, bottom of the box. Here's the other side, which is the part that comes out of the slipcase. Under there, pretty much the same thing. The spine. Back cover with a nice shot of Hitch himself there. And this is set up in the same book-style packaging as the first volume. This packaging looks very nice. Unfortunately, it's not very good for practical purposes with getting your discs in and out because it's very easy to get fingerprints on there, and that can make your discs glitch at times, which I'm not a fan of. That's why I prefer more conventional packaging where you have like individual sleeves or cases for your disc. Nice opening page there with a quote from Hitch and some great, photos of posters and such. First film in the collection is Saboteur from 1942. This is not to be confused with the earlier Hitchcock film that's called Sabotage, which came out in the 30s. This one, of course, features a young man who's on the run when there is a fire at an airplane factory where he works, and he's accused of sabotaging the factory and conspiring against the American government when there's actually something much more at play there. And some of the only kindness he gets on his journey are from the most unlikely people, including a blind man and a parade of circus freaks. Over time, he falls in love with a relative of that blind man who, of course, she was initially apprehensive, but in true Hitchcock fashion, they end up together. This one, I think, is pretty underrated as a Hitchcock film. It's a pretty straightforward thriller, but it is a lot of fun despite that. One thing I didn't mention earlier, again, you do get the 4K and the Blu-ray of each movie. The Blu-rays are identical to the earlier released Blu-rays, and the 4Ks, I can't say for sure if they were sourced from more recent masters or what, but they generally all do look pretty nice. I'll share some more feedback on picture quality when we get to the end. I also want to add that the 4K discs also include the bonus features on them. A lot of times you just get those slapped on the Blu-ray, but here, Universal actually put them on the 4K discs as well, so much appreciated there. Next up we have Shadow of a Doubt, which stars Joseph Cotten and also has the likes of Hume Cronyn and Henry Travers in supporting roles. This time around, a young girl living in a small town is ecstatic to hear that her uncle, who she hasn't seen in years, is coming to visit. But it quickly becomes apparent there's more to this man than meets the eye, and that he may actually be the merry widow murderer who's been going around killing elderly women and taking their money. Is this true, or is there actually another killer out there? Again, this is a great film right here. Alfred Hitchcock had been known to call this his favorite movie that he ever made. And well, I don't know if I'd say it's my favorite. It's actually very good. It's got everything you could ever want in one of Hitch's films. Originally released in 1943, and certainly a classic that stands the test of time. You don't always hear this one talked about like you do some of his other movies, but I think it deserves a place in that echelon as well. Now we jump to 1955 with The Trouble with Harry. And this movie is very unusual because it's one of Hitchcock's very few outright comedies. A dead body of a man called Harry has been found, and it's certainly confusing to the townspeople, one of whom is a beautiful young woman played by Shirley MacLaine in her screen debut. And her young son is portrayed by a very young Jerry Mathers, who a few years later would be known for playing the title character on Leave It to Beaver. I mean, some of what goes on in this movie really has to be seen to be believed. It's like a beautifully shot picture of small town life, but then the situations that arise here are increasingly absurd throughout the film, and every Hitchcock movie has humor to some extent, but this, of course, being an outright comedy, has it more than most. I don't want to go into too many details because that might veer into spoiler territory, but I really did like revisiting this one. It's a lot of fun, and usually fun's not the word you associate with Hitchcock, but I would say that it is the case here. Then we go forward about another decade to Marnie. In this movie, Tippi Hedren plays a beautiful young lady who takes jobs with various companies, but uses her know-how to end up robbing the companies blind and running off. But one of the men that she tries to rob is a young company owner played by Sean Connery, who is onto her scheme. And to make things even more complicated, he falls in love with her and marries her, putting her in a situation where she probably won't be able to strike again. The two leads in this movie are great, and there's even a supporting role from Alan Napier as Sean Connery character's father. He's the actor that would go on to play Alfred on the 1960s Batman show. And there are there's some great dialogue, and the chemistry between the two leads is great. Though admittedly, this one does drag on a little longer than it needs to. It clocks in at about 130 minutes, which is far too long. I mean, it should have been about half an hour shorter. That's not to say there aren't some great moments in this one, but it is around this point that Hitchcock kind of starts to sink into a level of mediocrity, and what he makes from this movie on just, in most cases, doesn't really equal the early stuff. That said, again, the performances from the two leads are what really make the film here, and it's not a bad movie, it's just not the Hitchcock movie I'll come back to the most often. And the final film in this collection, we go forward about another decade. This is Family Plot from 1976. Family Plot is noteworthy because it was the final film ever directed by Alfred Hitchcock. I believe he died around 1980, so this was maybe about 4 or 5 years before his passing. This time around, there's two couples, one of whom is a cab driver and a phony psychic, and the other are actual criminals who've been kidnapping people and holding them for ransom. The two paths eventually cross when there's a search going on for the long-lost heir to a fortune. And this is a movie, again, not one of Hitchcock's better ones, but it's got some moments. The characters of this movie are actually surprisingly entertaining, including Bruce Dern as the cab driver. And there's also a small supporting part from Ed Lauter. You probably don't know his name, but he plays a supporting role in pretty much every movie ever made. And there are some great sequences in this movie. Unfortunately, it does get a little heavy-handed with all of its plot elements and intertwining connections there. I do like this movie, but kind of going back to what I said about Marnie, it's not one of the Hitchcock movies that I find myself really watching a whole lot or considering a true classic. That said, I think everyone should watch it at least once. And then in the back of the book, we got another photo collage and a shot of Hitch himself. Now, from what I can tell, there are no new bonus features in here, but everything's been ported over from the earlier collections. Picture quality-wise, most of these movies actually look very good. I was really surprised with the earlier black and white films in the collection. A lot of people claim that black and white's not going to benefit from 4K, but I disagree. When you have things like HDR and the wider range of lights and darks and brights and shadow detail, black and white films sometimes are the best test of how those are going to look. The later films, for the most part, don't look half bad. The Trouble with Harry is probably the best looking movie in the series here because it's got those beautiful autumn settings and really takes advantage of the color range. Level of detail is a nice boost from the already impressive looking Blu-ray. The latter two movies don't fare quite as well. Marnie is a very soft looking film. It really always has been, and that's even more apparent when you do something like a 4K disc that brings out all the inherent resolution. It's a faithful looking transfer. Don't expect something that's razor sharp or to rank amongst the best in the Hitchcock catalog or 4K releases. Family plot actually does look better than the earlier released Blu-ray. That earlier released Blu-ray actually got some really bad reviews. I don't know if it was quite as bad looking as some people have said over the years, but the 4K transfer does appear to look a little more natural and less artificial. Again, it's not a great looking transfer, but it's at least a little more faithful than the older release. So, based on the 5 movies that are in this set and the 4 that were in the previous one, I'm led to believe that the third set will probably be the final one, and the movies that should be included there based on what we haven't gotten in one of these sets so far are Rope, The Man Who Knew Too Much, Torn Curtain, Topaz, and Frenzy. And several of those I'm certainly looking forward to getting in their eventual 4K debuts, Rope being a personal favorite of mine. Are you a fan of Alfred Hitchcock, and have you had a chance to pick up this set yet? Comment down below and let me know what you think. Also, remember to subscribe to my channel for more content because I'm always posting new videos, and make sure you give this one a like if you found it helpful. I'm Taylor T. Carlson. I'll see you next time.